Welcome back to MVP Real Estate Podcast, Season 4, Episode 3. We have Michael Van Every from San Jose, California with Republic Urban Properties. Wealth of knowledge in real estate. He said he was 55 now.
55, yeah.
Heading into his golden years. We talk a lot about, obviously, the differential between locations, him in California, us in Wisconsin, trends that he's seeing. He is heavy in the commercial real estate market, dabbled a little bit in residential before, and we kind of go through, I guess, the cycle of what they focus on within their company, and what their horizon looks like going into spring or end of 2024. So before we give away the whole show, we'll bring him in. All right, well, welcome to the show, Michael. Thanks for giving us the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We are going to jump right into this. You are currently working and you've started a company, Republic Urban Properties, which I have a bunch of questions on because I was reading before the show. And you have amassed a lot of properties and a lot of projects there. But before you got there, if you could give us like a little brief review or summary of what got you to be in this position you're in today.
Sure. Well, again, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a local story about a guy that grew up in San Jose. His family was involved in local grocery stores, so always connected to local politics. And as fate would have it, local politics served as my vehicle into the first home building industry, working for some of the great home builders like Steve Schott, former owner of the Oakland A's, a company called Citation Homes, but also on the advocacy side with the Building Industry Association here in California. And that eventually that led to my desire to really build, on the infill parcels. I was tired of building, on outlier places, the old saying, pay paradise to put up a parking lot. That's kind of what I was doing. And my longing was to build cities. And so when the opportunity, and people started looking more infill opportunities, but when the opportunity came about for Republic Urban Properties, it actually happened through the Santa Clara County Building Trades Association. They were the one that recommended me to my partner, Richard L. Kramer, in 2006. And really the rest is history. I've been here since 2006, really as his managing partner, and it's been a privilege.
That's awesome. And we've had a couple people on, some developers, and they talk about subdivisions and subdividing lots, but you're talking bigger than that. You are talking cities, which is super impressive.
Yeah.
And obviously you mentioned it before, working within politics with that, you are going to have to be in close communication, I would imagine, with city planners and people in that department. Do you find that as an easy path because you've been in politics for so long, or was there a learning curve getting into the bigger infrastructure in that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because I think in California, to be, a well-rounded developer, you really have to have a very kind of background in understanding how each local government works. And what's crazy in California in particular is every local government works differently. There's foundational parts of local government through municipal codes that are consistent, but the way they may process a project, or of course how their general plans are approved, are vastly different. The state of California is trying to do a more uniform building process. It's been difficult, but certainly my background in local politics and my involvement in philanthropic matters, both my wife and I, we're very fortunate to be able to, know not just the city planners, but ultimately we try to work hard to be in community-based organizations that are affiliated with key decision makers.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you've always been in commercial, because along the building side and knowing your city planners, commercial real estate is a whole different entity than residential.
It is.
So to have some background in commercial real estate like you did at a young age and know the city planners, I'm sure kind of helped you into the role you're in, I would imagine.
It did, and a little bit of reversal. I was actually in the home building side first.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I was doing those classic 8,000 square foot lots, building roads and sewer and infrastructure for large, making smaller cities bigger, pretty large cities like the city of Salinas here in our agricultural belt in Monterey County in California. But then again, that background though translated to commercial, but it was a rethinking of how the financial side of the projects work. Vastly different selling single family homes, obviously, than say building and renting commercial real estate of all types. Vastly different, and more intense, I would say, on the commercial side. But it's nice to have a touch point for both disciplines, whether home building or for commercial real estate. But now, as a 55-year-old male, I'm probably more in tune with commercial real estate and how that functions financially.
Yeah, and that's what I've heard. It is vastly different from your perspective, because I couldn't, excuse me, I couldn't weigh in on this one because I have no experience on the commercial side.
Yeah.
What do you think in your history or your background has been the biggest difference between the residential and the commercial side?
Good question. First, I think it's just how it's approved, and so obviously you have a lot or multiple lots where you either buy the land or you buy the airspace, and so how the state of California treats the mapping and ownership process is vastly different from commercial, where you'll only have one building, one lot. So it's really that simple. It comes down to subdivision of the land. And then, of course, how finance works. Obviously, you own a building, but you probably owe 65% of that building to commercial real estate to a bank. I guess not that much different than when you own a home, but it's just I think an ownership difference more than anything, and a mapping difference in California. But the business models are totally different, much different. In particular, after the financial crisis of 2008. Home building shifted vastly for home builders, the way they accept deposits and the way they sell, and develop land, to where commercial real estate's probably staying pretty consistent in its model, although those models are changing every day now with new financial hurdles like interest rates. But they're very similar but very different, as you've noted.
Yeah, and I always note when I'm trying to bring up examples of how commercial and residential are different. Like I always bring up the Walgreens system that they've got, where Walgreens doesn't own any of the buildings.
Sure.
I believe their parent company owns it, but Walgreens brand leases to themselves.
Correct.
So there's a lot more I don't know, flexibility. I call commercial real estate the Wild West, because I feel like you can honestly do what you want as long as your paperwork is good, but it's not as regulated as let's just say the residential market.
Yeah, the model you mentioned also is how wealth was built at McDonald's. Same situation where
Oh, really?
Yeah, if you've ever watched the movie The Founder, Michael Keaton's character, of course, Ray Kroc, that's how he became a billionaire, by owning all of his land and leasing back that land and building to his operators. But it's a great model because it enriches both the landowner, the building owner, and in most cases, the operator of the business. And to your point, that's how commercial real estate really touches so many different people, whereas home building is really, affecting the homeowner and maybe their neighbors, and then of course the developer exits, and that's the end of it. Whereas commercial real estate, we're in it for the long haul, sometimes for the best case, sometimes for the worst case. But yeah, I love the way you characterize the Wild West. In particular today, it is truly the Wild West.
Yeah, it's there's ups and there's downs right now in the market, at least here in Wisconsin with commercial real estate.
Sure.
Brick and mortar from, or at least this area is hurting.
Yes.
Is that what you're seeing out in San Jose as well?
Oh, yes. Post, pandemic and, low interest rates, there has been a tectonic shift in commercial real estate of all types. Whether it's a cost factor, a use factor, or even just you know, kind of a what is this, you know, what's this building going to be for the long-term factor? It's just, there's so much has changed. But in particular, the cost side, and it's interesting to hear you say that for a place like Wisconsin or Chicago, where construction costs are typically lower than say here in California. But now here in California, the replacement costs for a new building, really say for an office building in particular, but even apartments ground up, you know, hotels, and it's just, long story short, you just cannot construct a new commercial real estate building today and expect it to be to reach those financial matrix hurdles that capital markets expect. So it's in short, there's just not a lot of new ground up market rate projects that are underway right now here in the Bay Area and the greater part of California. That's not to say it's everywhere, but it's very difficult with the cost side now, with interest rates being what they're at. And then we've seen a tremendous amount of cooling off for apartment rents. That's a national average, in fact, unless you're in the Southeast or maybe Arizona, but they've had hyperinflation, right? So it's difficult. It's a very difficult market, and it probably will stay this way for you know, at least another year, in my opinion.
Yeah,
So
that's what.
it sounds a lot like how the residential market is, right? Like you're getting priced out of being able to buy the fix and flips or the fixer uppers to rent them out, like, and then you're trying to figure out the numbers align, like you said, with the matrix of what you expect on return and how quickly. So
yeah, true. You bring up a good point. That's been another, you know, actually to some extent a commercial business where you are fixing properties and either renting them or, you know, selling them. But you have a little bit more chance on something that's existing and doing a value add. I think that's where most of the capital markets on the equity side, but also tremendous programs on the debt side would say, hey, you have a structure, a building, or what have you that you want to, you know, reinvent, or, you know, you want to enhance, or maybe you want to create an affordable situation. That part of the capital markets is still moving pretty well. But again, if you see an obsolete piece of property that has a great piece of land and you want to blade that and go vertical, it's I don't care what commercial asset it is, it's almost impossible right now, at least in March of 2024.
wow.
And it's so timely that you bring that up, because down the street we have a company that's here in Wisconsin. They bought up a couple commercial unit buildings that were not historic to our town, but on the older side. They tore them down, I believe it was July, August of last year. They were supposed to, over the winter, get prepped for build, and they've since called the project off for at least a year because they can't get funding to work.
Yeah.
All the build costs have escalated to the point where they can't even build them.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a virus right now that the industry has, and I'm not sure what is going to break loose in terms of what, you know, will it be a lower, you know, interest rate? Because right now, just from a financial perspective, if your return on cost on a commercial project, say, is 5%, that's too low, because, you know, the cap rate or the value that the building's actually worth, you can't have a 5% cap rate and a 5% return on cost. That the capital markets on the equity side will not accept that. So they want to see about a 1.5 above that cap rate, or a 6.5 return on cost and a 5%, you know, cap. And 5%,
And that would be bare minimum.
Bare minimum. And you know, we have projects that are 6.5 above a cap rate, and just zero interest. And it's interesting there, without naming names, I spoke to a very prominent family who owns a lot of hotels in Chicago, and they're not hurting for money, but they are just sitting on the sidelines, and they're not interested. And they have real estate in every single part of the United States. They have a very large presence in San Francisco, as they do Chicago, and they're just kind of hanging tight. I spoke to this great guy yesterday who runs their San Francisco office, and he's like, I don't know why we're not investing, because there's good projects to invest in. I just know that we're not, and it's frustrating. And
Yeah.
so it's just like, who's going to fire that starter's pistol to bring back wealth in commercial real estate? Because there's billions sitting on the sidelines, guys. And the question is, when will that re-enter the market so we can get going back on our city building, which has been interrupted entirely by the pandemic, and has created a whole new kind of pattern of migration and growth throughout this country.
Yeah. And I'm interested to see which companies or what industries go back to like brick and mortar. Because before the COVID shutdown, those mixed use office buildings where you could have a common space, but then each company would kind of have their own little office, I felt like those were growing. And now everybody's working at home. And then obviously everybody boosted up their delivery wing of their company. So those storage, those industrial buildings have now kind of shrunk because everything's delivery truck now.
Yeah.
That's my worry for commercial, is everything is just gonna kind of fade. And I'm hoping it doesn't, because those are important industries. That's what brings cities together, is the companies.
Yeah, I think for a long time, me personally, I was angry about the policies that was, just basically dictated to us by the health officials in most of our counties, which really shut down, everything that you just mentioned. And then as we reopened, technology, as we're witnessing here in this podcast, has emerged as a more effective deliverable of how people work and communicate. And so we have a complete paradigm shift from from going to the office. So I don't think the die is yet, finalized or cast on, what does this look like? But I think we all, intuitively know, have a gut feeling that, and the evidence appears that a hybrid will be the standard for the large companies. And here in the Bay Area, the easy ones are the Googles, the Apples, the Intuits, the NVIDIAs. Those companies have adopted effectively, models that allow their employees to have flexibility. But that's great for them, but it hurts, people in our industry who have been landlords and who have, essentially built these cities, because we had such a renaissance post 2008 of city building and transit, orientated development. And now we're finding that the daytime population in San Francisco, San Jose, Oakland, Los Angeles, depending on where you're at, is vastly different. So a reinvention of those spaces, especially on the office hotel side, is underway. And I would say with the capital markets and the things we just previously discussed on cost, it is a barrier of entry to reconfiguring, reimagining our cities. So it's I'm sure you guys have heard the saying, and I try to, since it's a Friday, let's be a little humorous. There is a motto in our industry, which is what you've heard: survive to 25. To see if we can start a new process of city building and a reinvention of the spaces now that have been abandoned as a result of remote work.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you, I don't want you to spill the beans of like your secret sauce of how you guys at Republic Urban Properties are reinventing or integrating.
Yeah. Well, there's no secrets in commercial real estate.
There isn't. So I guess I will straight out ask, what are some things that you guys are doing with some of your buildings? Because from what I read, and I might be off on my information, you guys do a lot of multi-use.
Yes.
So it's not just straight storefront. It might be a storefront on the lower and rental units above. Are those some of the things that you guys are adopting in your builds or in your renovations to help kind of like lessen the burden? Or in the residential space, I'll say if you have a single family home and you have a vacancy, you are 100% vacant.
Yeah.
If you have a multifamily and you have a vacancy, you may be 25% vacant.
Yeah.
So that's a big liability on the single family side. And I would say that as a commercial space, if you have a storefront and there is vacancy, you are 100% vacant.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, in particular with these storefronts. So storefronts, between say 1,500 feet and 5,000 feet, these are small businesses. And so, it's very difficult for small business owners to get loans. And so we do have one couple large retail mixed use properties, and mixed use, for whatever reason, an apartment above, say, in the case of Millbrae, California, it's really dependent on location, and you tend to get more of the corporations that come into some of these good locations. So that part of the mixed use, for whatever reason, is easier. On a standalone basis, say a strip retail, if you don't have an anchor tenant like a Safeway or a Kroger's or something that's anchoring that shopping center, it is very difficult to attract, a number of users, especially, between say 1,500 feet and 5,000 feet. It's extraordinarily difficult, especially if you're doing a new build, because that means you better bring that new build to a warm shell, which means you have their bathrooms, all the drywall, and all the HVAC system ready to go. If you don't, it's a struggle. And I can say that firsthand, that we've struggled going from, saying, all right, here's a cold shell space, just the walls, no bathrooms, none of the things I mentioned, none of the HVAC, none of the the drywall. It's a big deal for a small business to go from, zero to warm shell and building that out. My lights just turned off here, so it's funny.
No, but the lighting looks like you're in a movie scene.
Oh, good.
It looks great.
Will we call it Godfather, or will we call it one of my favorite, Dumb and Dumber? We'll have to figure out what movie. Hot Tub Time Machine.
Wow.
But in any
If only we
event,
had one, right?
Yeah, exactly. In short, retail is a very difficult commercial real estate asset, and it requires a ton of capital by the owner, landlord, and a ton of investment by the tenant. And boy, you better make sure you pick the right tenant. I can tell you from experience, I've picked some good tenants, really good tenants, and I've picked some not so good tenants. And ones you would think would have succeeded, that just great business plans, would have been amazing if they would have just had this place open, but they couldn't go from zero to open because they couldn't get the financial wherewithal and the loans that they need small business wise to make it happen. So it's a tough, retail is a tough commercial industry right now.
Yeah, and from what the little I know from commercial, those staple tenants that you said early on are important to that whole shopping center.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, that's a heavy chunk of it may not be 100% of your fillable space, but that's a large chunk of your profit.
Oh yeah.
And if they leave, the sales cycle to get a new person in is so much longer. Like we think on the residential side, like I'm going to list my house, someone will talk, within 60 days we'll get a new owner, title will change. But even a rental unit, you put it up on the market for a couple of months maybe, and you get a tenant. The commercial side, it is a long sales cycle. So there's a lot of holding costs and a lot of nerves that go in. So that is a very stressful point to be in.
Thanks for reminding me. It is. It is. You're so. I think you just captured it beautifully. I just sent a note to my this 5,000 square foot Korean restaurant. He's got a permit ready to pick up. He's supposed to start paying rent in July, and he's been in contract with me now almost a year. He hasn't started construction. And so there's a lot of sleepless nights, worrying about those type of tenants. And we do everything to help them. We give them large tenant improvement allowances. Large, I'm talking several $100,000.
Yeah.
And yet sometimes that's still not enough to get that business from, again, what we explained, from cold shell to warm shell to open. And so I would tell you that the Republic, business plan, that was a business plan that we started in 2016-17, where everything looked great. And again, once the pandemic changed, and once it changed it forever, and then interest rates now have really been our bugaboo, for small business. I don't, again, going back to our original kind of discussion on what's going to start, what's not going to start in cities. I don't see a lot of new retail and certainly office across the country. I can't even see a day right now where there would be demand for a new office building for exactly those reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah. And the supply is up. So to build a new one, yeah, kind of just go take what is available.
Correct.
You had mentioned, or I read on the background of the company, and you guys were doing smart growth projects. Can you explain what you mean by smart growth projects? I don't know if that fills in with things that you've got going on, or if that is a entirely different thing.
Yeah.
But I feel like it kind of alludes to what you're trying to do to ease the tension of what's going on in the commercial market.
Yeah, smart's an open-ended kind of definition, maybe subjective to what you're applying it to. I guess in California, and I think we should probably change the narrative from smart to sustainable and sociologically kind of in fit. There's a real movement, as you probably know, California. We do have a tremendous amount of wealth. And in Silicon Valley, there's a right, wrong, or indifferent because there is costs associated with smart or sustainable and green, whatever narrative you want to paint it with. But there clearly is an effort to work climate control into new development, and that's the thing about new development. It's always the test case for providing smart, sustainable, green, whatever you want to apply. And so real examples of that are now here in California. Again, these come with costs. So I'm just reporting the news in that, we're forced in most cases to do smart growth, which I think long-term is best for the environment. But for example, now in California, in most cities, everything is electric. So if I want to build a mixed-use project, my water heaters or my boiler, it has to be electric. My ground floor retail with my chef has to be electric. That's not necessarily something chefs want to hear when you're trying to attract a marquee restaurant to a destination. So that's one example. They call the Greenpoint energy standards here that we have. But I think then there's when you get back to what I would define as smart, it's most people would agree because they probably thought the same thing. You walk by that corner gas station that was shuttered. They pulled the tanks out. What should be on that corner?
Wow.
And it gets back to, okay, maybe there's a bus stop there, or there's a rail stop, or there's something that we need to put in there as an infill project, commercial, hotel, office building, not likely anymore, but certainly for somewhere so people to live, to be in that community. So again, I think smart may be overused, but I would say that it's a blue sky thing to make sure that you're putting in the right type of development for that neighborhood, for that city, but also going a step further, and you probably are making sure that it hits all of those environmentally sustainable items that you can hit without it overburdening the project to be unfinanceable. And so, solar now, charging stations, I think these are all things that people want and expect and need if we are going to somehow combat climate change on some level. That's, again, whether you fall down in your political narrative, whether you agree with that or not, I think that's in our community now as developers, that's considered smart, those types of investments.
Okay. And that's why I wasn't sure if it went. What's that?
I just have a random idea. Like, charging stations, right? Like they're normally tied to like shopping malls or like dealerships or sometimes municipal buildings or city buildings, right? Why not convert old gas stations, like you said, where they pull the tanks, put in charging stations? I don't know how much that costs. I'm sure it's a pretty big amount. But then add like activity centers. Once they start charging their car, they get a code. They can enter a gated like basketball court, tennis courts, pickleball courts, like something to pass the time instead of them just sitting in their car waiting for the car to charge. Because sometimes it could take 45 minutes, an hour, right? Like again, I've been loosely following like electric vehicles and what they require, and some have gotten better with their quick charge to 80%, but it's still you're just sitting around. So why not do something while you're doing nothing? I don't know. Like,
I love your idea, and I think a little known fact: Shell Oil Company just purchased some of the larger charging stations. So I think they have to start putting charging stations on gas stations. That's just they have to do it.
right.
There's a little concern, and there's engineering related to gas versus electricity. That makes sense, but they'll
Yeah.
figure that out. But I like where you're going with your idea on that has to be integrated into commercial projects, in particular, maybe retail themed projects like you're talking about. And it's funny you mention that because there are a number of great pickleball concepts. Tesla is making massive investments in the infrastructure. So I think what you just stated, I think that's happening. And I think
Really?
that would be something that, investors should look towards. And there's some great startup businesses that are going to do exactly what you just mentioned. So it's not an idea, it is a business plan. And I think it's going to be, you're going to see that countrywide because I still don't own an electric car. Why? Well, I'm an anxious guy. I have fear of anxiety and of range anxiety.
Yep.
And then also the depreciating values of electric cars. The minute, you talk about driving a car off the lot, you lose value. On an electric car, you better understand that there's not much of a resale market if you're putting 50K mile on it, and what's that going to be? That being said, we need the infrastructure, and I love your idea, and frankly, it's probably an idea that's going to be implemented in some of our projects going forward.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
And of course, Dan brings pickleball into the show. Big
You
pickleball.
play
I normally wear-
pickleball, Dan? You
I
play
normally have a
pickleball, is that what that
pickleball
is?
hat, but today I chose the branding, the company branding. So
Okay,
That's
okay.
fine.
Well, pickleball, I'm sure, as it is there, is just a rage across the country.
right,
So,
yeah,
and it's so consistent with commercial real estate. It's fantastic.
that's funny.
That's cool. Yeah, I was going to ask about the charging stations because as California's been pushing more and more for regulations for electric vehicles, and I'm not from California. Electric vehicles here in the Midwest don't do well in the cold. So you see very few of them out here.
Yeah.
But in California, like I'm seeing videos on social media and news coverage about how people aren't getting their cars charged and the charging stations aren't working because it's too cold, and there's a lot of issues with that. And I figure like if there's a big push to go to electric vehicles, they're going to have to get more charging stations. That's inevitable. And where are they going to put these things? So I'm glad that it seems like the feel or the climate in California is to push to get more of those in, because obviously if you're going that direction, it's going to need to happen.
Yeah, Tesla is going to emerge as what they call the Type 3 charging station, the rapid charging station. They appear to be the safest choice in terms of providing that infrastructure. And, by way of example, that same Livermore project I've mentioned, they're going to be putting those Type 3 stations in the shopping center. So it's along the freeway, and then you'll have that. But I like where Dan was going in that, how do you capitalize that as a revenue generator also? And I do think, whether it's a brewery or a tap house that, of course, you don't want to mix drink and drive,
Right.
but
Well, we're not condoning them mixing them.
I-
We're just offering a
Yeah.
service while their car charges.
But in California, in retail, it's my good friend Don and Wally here, and Wally Stanger, he always says that retail really has a bandwidth, which is how many forms of food or how much can the stomach, really be the generator to retail. In other words, most of our retail uses are food orientated. And so there's a bandwidth of, how many things that you can provide that are food driven. And then what can you provide? So to Dan's point, a pickleball, or even a spot where you're traveling with your children, maybe there's a jump house or something more, kind of non-food entertainment. I still think movie theaters. When I want to go to a movie tonight, there's things that, like you said, if the future is plug, wait, how do you take advantage of that in commercial real estate, Dan? I think you've done a great job identifying as one way to do it. And that could help reinvigorate some of these commercial places that are not doing well.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'm all about electric vehicles. I wish we could do more in the Midwest, but that your range anxiety that you're talking about is what I have, because I was looking at that Ford Lightning and I
Yeah,
was like, oh, that would be so cool. Like the towing capacity is pretty much the
sure.
same as what I have,
Yep.
but I couldn't get to Milwaukee and back pulling a trailer.
Nope.
Like that, I can't do that. There's no
You
way.
barely do
And
that
there's
with
no
your gas because
charging.
you leave it on you leave it on E all the time. This guy is
Yeah, but
notorious for riding into the station on fumes,
he
man.
gives other people anxiety, the gas
Right.
car.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yesterday, I rolled into the gas station, 0
Oh
miles
my
to empty,
God.
and I
but
pulled into the pump.
it took you only 5 minutes to, to basically fill it up, 10 minutes to fill it up, whereas it might take you 30 minutes on a charge. Again, that's where the manufacturers are now looking at, well, maybe the all electric needs to be blended in a hybrid sense.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to track towards that. But as you know, in California, by 2035, our
I was just
governor,
gonna
right, wrong, or indifferent, has mandated that there will be no more gas sales of that. The legislator and the next governor may need to rethink that strategy if we don't have this infrastructure in place.
Yeah.
That would be a devastating part to an already expensive economy that we have here. And so, again, in California, we want to do the right thing, and oftentimes, for climate control. But you got to push the envelope to where you're not, you don't become non-competitive. And I think there's some concerns right now that California could be non-competitive if it doesn't start to kind of tack back towards a little bit more middle ground. But I do think electric cars are the future, and we have some of the best ones here in the world. And it is an opportunity for commercial real estate, as we touched on, to take advantage of that and to reinvent spaces that would also benefit, charging stations and electric cars.
Yeah. And on the electric theme, even I know the vehicles are one side, but the commercial, the residential houses with solar, you'd mentioned that as well.
Sure.
I was talking to a company actually based out of California to get solar panels on my house, and the topic of the battery storage came up.
Yeah.
And they're like, do you want one? And I was like, what's your recommendation? I'm not knowledgeable in this. You tell me. And they're like, to be honest, Tesla's going to create a battery that's much better than what we have today.
They are.
So don't go with it. Take your dollar for dollar buyback from the city and just wait until the next battery comes out, or 2 versions from now, because it's going to hold more. It's just going to be better. That's where technology is going. So that was their recommendation, and they're in the solar electric world.
Yeah. In California now, you used to be able to have solar, invert that power, and it would go back into the grid, and PG&E would pay it, for you. So there was and there's obviously heavy federal and state incentives. A lot of those have gone away, in particular the utility commission companies here and the utility commission has redirected that you can really no longer, as a homeowner, business owner, sell power back into the grid. You can only
Really?
Yeah, that power goes free to the utility. Now, you have the ability to store it, to your point about a battery, and then you can program your battery and your system that when PG&E, in this case here in California, starts charging you for the highest per kilowatt hour, say at 5 p.m. when you get home, you want to start cooking, you want to do laundry, you can actually have that battery supplement that time. Therefore, that would lower your rate because you're not on the grid with PG&E. So to your point, I agree that you better make sure that you have your best performing battery. And it might make sense to wait, but a lot of people here in California are not waiting. There's still federal and state incentives for those batteries. But it's a commitment, and you're going to have to put some upfront dollars into it. Meanwhile, though, PG&E here in California continues to raise rates, and it's very expensive. It's affecting all of our commercial real estate. Wow. That plus insurance costs are really affecting the expense side of commercial real estate, but also hitting the pocketbook of John and Joan Q. Public. Again, that's part of the issue here in California that we're still facing post-pandemic.
Yeah. How long ago did they change that regulation to where you can't sell back the power to the utility company?
I believe I think the laws changed from 2022 to 2023. That's my understanding.
Okay. Man, that's a big hit. That was a big selling feature for me, where I could sell it back because the batteries are so expensive.
They are.
And
Well,
that's why, oh man, that stinks.
you might check your local's jurisdiction. Obviously, each power company works differently.
Yeah,
Wonderful Pacific Gas and Electric, that's how they operate.
the wonderful.
Right.
They're wonderful.
Are you starting to, because you were talking about with your commercial spaces, letting it pretty much build the suit. So you give them the outside structure, they can go in. Are you now putting electric, like solar for those commercial properties that you're building now? Are you already putting those in knowing where it's headed? Or
Yeah.
is that something that your new tenant would come in and put that in?
No, if it's a retail office, that's our responsibility, and then the tenant shares the benefit of the power. As the case of this building that we're sitting in here, I have pretty much mitigates all my power, but again, under that model I mentioned, it goes back into the grid, and PG&E gives me a slight credit as a business owner. But it also mitigates the power needs of my large restaurant. I have an 8,000 square foot restaurant on a multi-story. And so it helps that tenant with his electricity bills. So they're not as much fluctuation in their cost, which allows for a higher rent they can pay. So yes, and then
Yeah,
for the residential apartments and or townhomes in particular, we are required to provide solar plus charging stations moving forward. That is a standard now of all
okay.
projects. But from a build for rent, which are townhomes now that we're building, imagine 2-car garage, 5-unit townhomes, commercial property we rent. You drive in your garage, your charging station is already retrofitted and ready to go. You probably just have to provide the cord. And then you have solar also that's powering your house. That is the new standard now. It is a cost benefit when you're doing more lower density, whether single family homes, townhomes. Why? Well, I'm not having to provide those gas lines, and so I'm saving a little bit on the heavy infrastructure when I build roads, streets, sewer. At least I can leave out that gas option, and I'm supplementing that with solar and those things that go with solar. So that part of it is actually heavily incentivized, and there's a lot of solar companies that want to be involved, that are giving the developer benefits moving forward. And there's real income that you can actually achieve if you design and build your apartment, your townhomes that way.
I gotcha. Yeah, and you kind of hit on my next question of cost when you put those things in. I wouldn't imagine it'd be like a break even where you save on the gas line, but the electric that you need to upgrade would pretty much break even in cost. Have you guys gone through like what it does cost to add a charging station? Like what would installing one charging station be at this point? And I'm guessing those costs will go lower as more and more people are in the game and we get more competition with it.
Yeah, good question. The solar companies, a lot of times will become your partner, and they'll be your third-party vendor. So in many cases, they'll give you maybe the charging station for a very discounted rate, or the battery pack or what have you. In return, you're leasing those from them, which they make money from, and you make money from as well, depending on your arrangement with that solar provider. So it's become a more of a value add in your revenue side to work with these solar companies at the beginning of your project. Same thing with Tesla. They'll come into your shopping center without a cost. They will provide all the infrastructure, charging stations, canopies for solar, and they'll even pay you rent on top of that based upon what they generate, and they'll revenue share in some cases to put those stations in. So I think the balance has shifted now, that it is an incentive for developers on the commercial real estate side to put charging stations, solar into the projects, because there's very entrepreneurial time for these solar companies.
Awesome. Yeah, I feel like we're looking into the future because we haven't gotten there really in Wisconsin. So it's I don't know.
Out here, we'll show you how it works, but we can't do anything about your weather. That's the problem. So
In a couple of years, we won't have winter. Like,
yeah.
I mean, it snowed 5 times since December, maybe
Yeah.
like significant amount to be affecting stuff, but
Yeah.
I luckily dodged it. I'm not in Wisconsin today. I'm actually in Phoenix area for the next couple of weeks. So
Spring training.
yeah, I get to enjoy this out here. It's 85 degrees at 6 o'clock p.m. and at the Brewers, watching Brewers play San Francisco. So
Oh, my San Francisco Giants. I think we won yesterday.
yeah, you did. You guys put it on in the middle innings there, fourth and
Yeah,
fifth
yeah.
inning.
I love the Brew
Yeah,
Crew.
yeah.
Uh,
I think with all of this talk, we should get into discussing how much we should be investing in Tesla, especially with how low it is right now. I'm just
well,
teasing.
what's the stock at?
No
One,
stock tips from this guy. I can only give tips on real estate.
We should
I
throw the disclaimer that this is entertainment. We're not giving stock
Yes.
advice.
There you
Yes.
go. Because you don't want to hear my stock advice. But yeah, no, Tesla, I would imagine, has a bright future, you know, in the solar business and battery business, obviously. And we still think of it as a California company because we know Elon Musk, if you're listening, we know you live in, we know you're living here in the Bay Area more than you say.
Where
It's
did?
right now it's at 169. It's
Oh, it
at its
has gone
height. It
down.
was 407 in November of 21.
Wow.
So I mean, with all of, like you said, the charging stations and that stuff coming, and the batteries that Marcus said he had experience with, that solar energy company might not be a bad gig, but
No,
Right.
no.
you could create competitions to get the people to come to those stations specifically to let their kids run wild and then compete against other people charging their cars. Hey, throw out the paddles and let's go. Like
I love your pickleball. You have no idea how close of a reality that's going to be. I think you're seeing the future, Dan. I think you're there.
dang. Only had some
I
money
don't
to
know about
invest
your
in
baseball
properties.
team, but I think you've got the other stuff down cold.
Yeah, yeah. That's funny. Cool.
We only have a few minutes left, but we
Yeah,
didn't get to talk into like what you're on to next because you, in the beginning of the show, I think we were off air actually. You were talking about how seasonal commercial real estate is, and right now we're in the spring, so we are
yeah.
hitting the busiest portion of both residential and commercial.
Yes,
So for
sir.
you guys over at Republic, what is on the horizon for your spring, summer, or what are you looking forward to out of the dark ages of
Yes,
winter?
yes, and this has been a fun time spending time with you guys. Really appreciate it. And you know, I'd say going forward, we still have the same business plans to try and start some projects, both for multifamily, hotels. But I think where we're immediately trending towards a start, although we still have some concerns about the capital markets. Assuming the capital markets maybe, kind of heal a little bit more while we're still in the building season, we have a large project in Fairfield, California, that's kind of halfway between Sacramento, California, and the Bay Area. And there you have a tremendous amount of growth from life science. Large companies like Genentech and Roche and these large life science companies that are in this Solano County region. And then you have military bases there as well in Fairfield. So we're looking at, as I touched on briefly, called build for rent. It's that 5-unit townhome, because here in the Bay Area, we're starting to see, people that live in cities who are, say, now in their, early 30s. We talked about home ownership, how difficult it is. And so, but people don't necessarily want to spend their entire life in a 2-bedroom flat, especially when these 2-bedroom flats, and I've built them, are really not designed for kids. They may be designed for dogs, but they don't have a lot of features for kids. And frankly, most people need 3 bedrooms. And they need cars, and they're going to drive. So we're looking at this build for rent project. It's catching fire and has all throughout the Southeast in places like Charlotte, Atlanta. Also, where Dan's at, not too far from there, Dan, you could probably see some of those examples in the greater Phoenix metro. But again, imagine 5-unit townhomes, side-by-side garage for 2-car garage. I mentioned, having charging stations, solar, but also a little backyard for their dog or for their child, and then amenity space, just like an apartment, pool, community room, gym, but detached, not in a multi-level, but within more of a subdivision. but operates as commercial real estate, meaning everyone pays rent and there's one landlord. So that's what we're trying to start here. It's capital markets have been a little quirky, as you know, but we still think long term that business plan, because if things are going to be so expensive to build on a multi-level, kind of basis, it only makes sense that, maybe a lower density. When I say lower density, I mean 25 to say 30 units of the acre versus say 55 to 100 units of the acre, more spread out. And so we're excited to start that business plan. Hopefully this year. We've had a lot of interest in, and I think the business plan's been proven in those areas I mentioned. But that's pretty much what we're involved with. That and just kind of asset management, making sure that we have, working a lot in the capital markets on longer term loans for our assets. I spend a lot of time doing that. And so again, survive the 25, and hopefully we'll be in a position in 25 and beyond with a more stabilized interest rate, where that's the new norm. And we could once again kind of heat this thing up, but that again will depend on jobs and a lot of other factors that I don't think the three of us can control. But hey, it's a great living, and there's challenges, but we work hard, and we still try to do what we can to make every city we work in a better place to be.
Yeah,
I got one question regarding those five townhomes you're talking about. Would there ever be a situation where after you guys build it, you could sell each individual unit back to the homeowner, and then basically say, hey, you five are now this community with these amenities? Obviously the price then would reflect, because they have access to that gym or that pool or whatever else, you then could be get a higher ask for the single
kind
unit.
of more of a condo feel.
Kind of,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. In California, we have a 10-year liability on construction defect. And so it would be a safe assumption to make that after a 10-year period in particular, and I'm only speaking about California, that would be an option to do that. And again, maybe the next kind of turbocharge to this business, to where we could increase home ownership, and which I think at the end of the day, even though I'm a commercial builder, really you need people to own their homes to invest in communities. So yeah, Dan, that would be an incredible way to boost home ownership, specifically in high, barrier entry markets like California.
Yeah, I really like that plan. That mid density is always a sweet spot for me personally. I feel like that's like the safe area to be in. Not everybody wants the A class, the 6,000, 10,000 square foot house. Well, I'll call it a mansion at that point.
Yeah.
in
But
Wisconsin.
a lot of what's that?
I said in Wisconsin.
Yeah, definitely. In California, we got to get a little bit more square footage, call it a mansion, maybe on a mountainside somewhere.
Sure.
But that mid density, that the smaller footprint house with a little bit of a yard is something sought after, because you're seeing people push away from the apartment complexes of 100, and unless they need to, with either price or location. But a lot of people would like a little backyard, but not a huge yard where they're outside mowing it for 2 hours in an afternoon, and not a lot of house where they have to clean all the time. Because a lot of people now, the younger generation, and I'm not that old, but the younger generation is more after like experiences, and they'd rather spend their money traveling. So those smaller price point homes, which is just enough space for them, I think is where the future's going. So to get on that now, I think is a brilliant idea.
Absolutely. And I think, I'm 55, heading to hopefully to my golden years. And I would say that the empty nester would echo everything you just said. So I do believe we'll see a lower density product built, as again, capital markets will never stay, dormant forever. And this would be a prominent business plan moving forward. So yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, because it really is your generation that we're targeting, knowing that you have, younger children. You probably maybe don't want to own. And there's a lot of younger people now that don't want to own, be tied to that, to your point. So I completely agree. And it really is dependent on, that kind of mindset that will drive this business plan.
That's exciting. I'm excited to see what you guys do with it. So
you just want to send us that business plan?
Come on out to the Giants Brewers series. Let's hang out. Let's have a hot dog, and then I'll take you around and show you all these communities.
And share that business plan with us too.
Certainly.
Just send us the
We'll start
packet
replicating
over.
that here and then maybe give you a kickback or something.
Hey, listen, there's no secrets in commercial real estate, gentlemen. Take every idea and run with it. That's what makes our industry fun.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I would take you up on a Giants game. Hunter Pence is no longer playing for you, so I can do it.
No, but I think you are Hunter Pence. You look just like him.
Oh, don't say that. He is my most. I don't know why, but I could not get on board with him.
You look kind of like him. He's beloved here.
I hope I didn't look like Hunter Pence when I was batting. That's what bugged me.
That was awkward, but
He was an all-star, and I'll
Yeah.
never take away his accomplishments, but man, that was gangly.
Yes, awkward. If you remember that World Series where he hit the ball like 3 times when he was swinging through,
Yeah.
but he is beloved, and he's
I know.
actually a San Francisco Bay Area resident now, and
Oh, really?
one of our color commentators. So, like I said, you could be his doppelganger.
Wow.
Dang. I've gotten Bumgardner. That's who I've gotten.
Bumgarner's another stalwart, but yeah, little different personality.
Yeah. No, that's
Wow.
cool. Well, wait, we're on an even year. So San Francisco is their odds to win the World Series.
No, I don't think we'll win the World Series. You guys have a team that could. You lost your manager, but you should be in the mix this year. I'd love for you to beat that Chicago Cubs team.
Thank you for
I
not
know.
mentioning his name. That's a traitor move if I've ever seen one, man.
That was treacherous.
Oh man. And he's got kids that go to high school in like Whitefish Bay, so like it's for them.
Yeah.
I know they got a lot of flack because he was deep rooted in that community, and then for him to just say, "Hey, let's," but I understand it because he had pressure from other managers across the MLB saying, "If you don't take this money, you're affecting our pockets down the road."
True.
So
Is that your rival? The Cubs are the Brewers' rival, right?
yeah, them in St.
Yeah.
Louis, I think.
St. Louis. Oh, we
Yeah,
don't like them
they
either.
frustrate me so much. Yadier Molina, Albert Pujols back in the day. Who else was with them, man? Just the Cubs and St. Louis frustrated me so much.
Yes. For us, it's the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Yeah, them too when we get to the NLCS or NLDS.
Yeah, we don't like the Dodgers.
Now you'll have fun with Ohtani this year.
Yeah.
At least he won't be pitching against you.
Yeah, well, he better be careful too about his little friend in that
I heard.
gambling situation is not a good look. That's not a good look.
So I didn't get to read much on it, and I know this has nothing to do with real estate. So if the visitors came for real estate, they can click
If you
out.
stay to the end, you get some nuggets.
yeah. Well, it sounds like we're all baseball fans, which is what we're living for here coming up.
Yeah, this big baseball. I still have all of the wood bats in college that I'd broken. Not me personally, but I was a pitcher.
Yeah.
That we had hung up in our college apartment.
Okay. Nice.
The bats of broken dreams.
I love souvenirs.
It was a great souvenir.
Yeah.
So Ohtani's translator
Yes.
was betting for Ohtani.
No, he was betting on NBA, soccer, and other things allegedly through a bookie, but to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars, which he then stole from Ohtani to pay back.
Okay, that's where it was. There was something where it crossed over to Ohtani's bank account.
Yes.
Stole from Ohtani. Hey, I'm taking this money. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what the story. I didn't get to read much on it, so I was kind of curious on what was going on with that one. But
doesn't know how to translate banking laws.
He spurned the Giants. The Giants really wanted him to come to San Francisco. So have fun in LA.
Yeah. Well, good luck to the Giants this year. It's hard to cheer. It's hard to cheer against the Giants.
Yeah,
it is.
I'm telling you, boys, if you guys come out to San Francisco, we'll go to a game, talk some more commercial real estate, and it's been a pleasure being on your show.
Hold on 1 second. Who was the manager for San Francisco? At Miller Park, when it was Miller Park, they would be yelling out. Was it Bochy?
Bochy.
They would razz him the whole time when I would go to those games, man.
4-time World Series champion.
Yeah.
Yep.
3 with the Giants, 1 with the Texas Rangers.
Wow.
We miss him. It was a dumb move letting him go.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah.
Well,
And
cool.
that's where
It
we're
was
at with council.
very
So
enjoyable
let's-
conversation. Love the dialogue here and the information, tidbits, everything. It's great.
Thank you guys. Really appreciate it, and feel free to stay in touch. And like I said, let's get together soon.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
absolutely. Well, I'll definitely keep in touch because commercial real estate is something that I've wanted to do. We've got this ski hill that's in the town that I live in. Been vacant for maybe a decade, 15 years. There was 3 owners to the land, and one of them died, and there was a big probate battle of who owns what. So it just sits there vacant every year. The ski lift is still on there.
Oh,
And I've got this like pipe dream of putting like little modular like Airbnbs on this hill. Because
yeah,
again, in the summer, it's a big lake draw. So
sure.
people coming up from Illinois or down from Minnesota have a place to stay. Our city doesn't really like short-term rentals, which is a hiccup there.
Yeah.
And then to find out who and how to obtain the land. But stuff like that would be a nice, exciting second step into real estate or to get into commercial. But
Well,
we
dream your
gotta,
best dream because you'll be surprised at how often dreams come reality in commercial real estate. So dream your best dream and you know, always hook up with people that are smarter than you and but just like I do, and you'll be surprised how fast those can become reality.
we'll have to
Great.
make our way up to
Awesome.
San Francisco.
Yes. All right,
Sounds
gentlemen.
good.
Thank you so much for being on your show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming
being
on. Thanks for giving us the time. Enjoy your weekend.
You too, my friends. Take care.
Bye bye.
See ya.